From the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching
The Week in Blog.
This week, we talk about the Supreme Court decision. We talk about the Daily Caller. But first, Bill, a little something happened in your home state of Massachusetts this week.
Yes. And I probably should apologize for my disastrous punditry. Complete debacle on my own part. I apologize to all Blogging Heads listeners who expect a higher quality analysis.
You guaranteed a victory.
I put a dinner on it. But even beyond just that, I just feel like I just completely misread the situation. And what bloggers and pundits often get knocked with is talking when they don't know what they're talking about, and I think that was a case where I did not know what I was talking about.
Some of it also, Bill, might be too close to home. I mean, sometimes it's like if you live in a state, you're in some ways you're the worst observer of that state. I mean,
what was fascinating to me, if you go to the Boston Globe site, Boston.com, they have the map. They have the town by town map, and this might only be of interest if you live here. But my town went 79% for Coakley. So,
wow.
My immediate surroundings, were fostering, my analysis. But you really see some very clear regional divides, suburban, urban-rural divides. Brown really just romped in the suburbs mainly. And it's almost like there were two totally different conversations going on in the state. There weren't a lot of towns that I could tell that were swing counties. You had a lot of states that went huge for Coakley, and a lot of counties went huge for Coakley, a lot of counties went huge for Brown, and only a smattering that were close. So there's just two totally different conversations happening as far as I could tell.
So obviously the blogs have been at Twitter about this for days now, but the story that I think has legs once you get past the obvious shock of Brown winning that seat in that state is Barack Obama. And President Obama went to Massachusetts the Sunday before the election. He campaigned there. He mocked Scott Brown's truck almost probably a dozen times. And so I think bloggers on the right and on the left are taking it to Obama. And I'll give you just a couple. Catherine Lopez at NRO. If you had any doubt that Barack Obama is not the political savior, it was clear tonight. A year in, he is clearly just another politician, and America sent him a message via Massachusetts. Two things about that, Bill. Number one, and I think I've talked about this before, but if you want to be a political pundit, insert words like clearly. I do this all the time, and for some reason it makes you sound smart. Clearly, such and such happened.
I'm sure I overuse that word all the time in my writing.
I think I learned it from reading National Review. The other thing, though, that I think is interesting is Kalo says if there was any doubt that Barack Obama is not the political savior. And I think that's important. And a lot of people have joked about Obama and being the superhero or whatever, or presenting himself as a savior. But there is something to be said. I think that some people have this sort of aura of invincibility, and it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, like, if you play the New York Yankees, and the New York Yankees always somehow manage to win in the bottom of the ninth, you start to believe that the Yankees are better than you, and you start to believe you can't beat the Yankees. And I think for a while, Barack Obama sort of had that going. I think for a while, people were very afraid of Barack Obama, and they didn't want to get on his bad side. And this is very important when it comes to passing legislation, because you want Democratic members of Congress to fear you a little bit if you're Barack Obama, and I feel like there is now a chink in the armor.
Well, and also you want to know if you're taking what is being viewed as a politically difficult vote, that if Obama comes to your state or your district,
yes,
he can strap you on his back. And,
right.
That clearly is not, there was...
Clearly. Clearly.
I think it was in the documentary Comedian with Jerry Seinfeld. I think it was put to him, how does it change the fact that you're now this comedy superstar? And they said, maybe it gives you 10 minutes.
Right.
You get a little bit of slack. You walk out on stage, you get some initial applause, but you still got to deliver. And I don't think Obama has completely, bankrupted his personal likability and favorability. Even in the Massachusetts exit poll, that one Republican pollster did, his approval of Massachusetts was still 59%. But it doesn't mean that you get to walk in there and all of a sudden whatever you say is going to automatically be embraced by the entire state.
Right. Yeah. A celebrity buys you a few minutes,
Right.
or a few months. And
but
then
to get back to the
deliver.
blogging on this, there's certainly plenty of folks on the left who took this as an opportunity to say, I told you so, that
right.
Trying to do all these compromises and trying to be bipartisan and not getting tough on Wall Street, not sticking by the public option, all those types of things had hurt him. A lot of gravitation to a Huffington Post interview with Martha Coakley's pollster, Celinda Lake, who's a very well-known Washington pollster.
And contacted them hours before polls closed to go after the White House and defend Coakley.
Right. And to say that clearly the perception that the White House is too close to Wall Street was killing him with independent voters in Massachusetts. And I think another poll I saw from CBS said something similar nationally. And that may speak to some of the tough talking about Wall Street earlier today. David Sirota at Open Left was very tough. There's something deeply embarrassing about Democratic voters and groups having to fight with Democratic leaders to get those leaders to even seriously try, much less pass even the smallest, most modest shreds of their promises. Having to do that evokes feelings of genuine shame in front of the other voters we told to vote for Democrats could supposedly matter, and the shame when we look in the mirror at a self that may have allowed itself to be unnecessarily duped. So there's definitely a lot of harsh rhetoric out there. But you also have harsh rhetoric not just towards Obama, but to these right-leaning Democrats. Matt Iglesias saying, Scott Brown joining the Senate will make it impossible to make big progress on the big issues facing the country. But a number of centrist Democrats have been making it clear for a while now they don't want to make big progress on the big issues facing the country. That's too bad, and Brown will only make things much worse. We're much more likely looking at a situation where Brown's victory becomes an excuse for people not to do things they didn't want to do anyway, than a situation where Brown's victory is the actual reason those things can't be done.
And you mentioned the coming to town, Obama coming to town for them. Ed Morrissey at Hot Air said it's not just that Obama can't help Democrats, he's killing their political prospects. His own approval ratings are plunging, and his agenda is so toxic that Democrats can't run on it in Massachusetts and win. So,
well, this is where liberals and conservatives are going to divide. Is it, what is it about the state of Obama's agenda that is politically problematic? Is it the actual goals he's trying to pursue, or is that he's not pursuing his goals forcefully enough? And one thing that I think we talked about this before, and actually there was a Hill article about this week. A number of online-oriented liberal groups are commissioning their own polls now to drive narratives and stories. And so you had a MoveOn.org, Democracy for America, Progressive Change Campaign Committee joint poll done by Research 2000, which Daily Kos has been using on a regular basis, identifying Obama voters that either voted for Brown or did not vote at all, and to determine what is it that you're angry about? Do you think Obama's going too far to the left, or do you think he's not fighting hard enough? And they had a fair amount of evidence to say they're mad that you're not fighting Wall Street harder, you're not fighting the insurance lobby harder. And you certainly see on the right attacks.
Well, wait a second there, Bill. And let me say, first of all, I think it's a good idea, as long as the polling's legitimate and as long as the polling has credibility. I think a great idea that these groups go out and do this and find information to bolster their points of view. But I would say Martha Coakley was for the public option, and Martha Coakley was very liberal, and all the things that progressives might not like about Barack Obama, they should have loved about Martha Coakley, and yet she was defeated by Scott Brown in Massachusetts. So, I mean, how would you respond to that? If they wanted someone who was for the public option, she was on the ballot.
Well, I wrote two things I'd say about that. I wrote a blog post myself that I posted before the election results, saying, look, if you were actually in Massachusetts, this was largely a non-existent campaign. There was not people that started paying attention a few days ago. There was not a real full airing of issues at all. I don't even think the word public option was uttered by anybody. Scott, to the extent that you were paying attention to what Scott Brown was saying, Brown is someone who voted for the Massachusetts healthcare reform that the current bill in Congress is modeled on.
Yeah, you're right. The Senate bill is very similar to Romney Care.
Right. It doesn't have a public option. It's an individual mandate, which is what the Massachusetts model is.
And it requires you to buy from a private insurance company as opposed to...
And Brown's argument was, we have health care here, and this federal bill is going to screw up what we have. Which is very different than the entire concept of having a universal health care plan is inherently bad. You saw a similar attack, I think, from the right in their targeting of seniors during this whole debate. Hey, Medicare is great. We love this government Medicare plan, and this bill's going to ruin it. So it's a different kind of argument than pursuing healthcare reform is inherently a bad idea. Now, the messaging worked. They certainly there's definitely a sense in Massachusetts that what is in the bill is not working for them, but I think there's a disconnect of understanding what is actually in the bill.
All right, so anything else on that one, Bill, or you want to hop on to the next topic? I'm sure a lot has been said about Massachusetts.
Well, I mean, beyond
where are you taking
Obama's overall agenda, there's now the question of what does Obama and the congressional Democrats do, particularly in terms of health care and Wall Street. And John Walker at Fire Dog Lake is making a point that one of the things that's being talked about is, do you take the Senate bill as it is and just have the House pass it letter by letter, because then you don't need to go back to the Senate. We don't have 60 votes in hand anymore. And that just goes straight to Obama's desk. The House liberals who don't want to do that because there's parts of the Senate bill they don't like. And then the follow-up argument is, well, these compromises we've been talking about, we can do through budget reconciliation, which doesn't require 60 votes. And so there's confusion what the strategy is going to be. The White House has given some conflicting messages. It's clear they haven't decided on a course yet. But John Walker at Fire Dog Lake said, hey, if you're going to go through budget reconciliation, hey, put the public option back on the table, because that still has support in the country more so than the individual mandate that's currently in the bill. There's definitely a push in the blogosphere. I mean, there's different pushes, I'd say. But there's some push that, look, you should be going bigger and bolder. You shouldn't be flinching at this. Ezra Klein was pretty harsh himself this week. Let me just find that link if give me a second here. The reaction congressional Democrats have had to Coakley's loss has been much more shattering. It's been a betrayal. And Klein is someone who's considered on the moderate tip as far as the blogosphere is concerned.
As far as the net roots are concerned.
I'm sorry?
As far as the net roots are concerned.
Yeah. The fundamental pact between a political party and its supporters is that the two groups believe the same thing and pledge to work on it together. And the Democratic base feels that it is held to its side of the bargain. It swallowed tough compromises on the issues it cared about most. It swallowed concessions to politicians it didn't like and industry groups it loathed, but it persisted. That's why they're Democrats. If Democrats let go of health care, there's no doubt they demoralize the Democratic base will stay home in November, and that's as it should be. So there's definitely a pressure not to get too stripped down with this, and some consternation that's the direction that they're going in, but no one really quite knows exactly.
You know what I think they should do, Bill, is exactly what Bill Clinton did after the 94 elections. I think if I were advising Barack Obama, it would be exactly what you would hate.
You heard welfare reform?
bring in Dick Morris and start triangulating. And here's what you ought to...
the shadiest, most unethical character you could find.
Yes, who just happens to be Dick Morris in any given election cycle. But no, I'd bring him in, and here's what Democrats should do, is say, we're going to pass this bill that says you cannot exclude somebody because of a pre-existing condition. That's it. And if you want to vote against that, go for it.
Well, there's talk of that.
And if you don't, I will take this pen. You know,
the tricky part of this, but that makes a lot of sense on a political level. It's clean. It's simple. You can understand it. It gets at the bad guy. You're done. The problem is, if you just do that, you risk jacking up premiums for everybody unless you do other things. And that's why it's linked to an individual mandate, because if you enlarge the risk pool, you put some cost pressure down.
And let me
if you're
make
going to
the
do an
point
individual
too, Bill.
mandate, you got to have subsidies to make sure everybody can afford it. And that's why you get a big price tag on the bill that makes it more politically complicated.
And let me make the point too, Bill. I am not advocating that. I'm saying if
I don't want to get you in trouble.
Because I don't believe in that. But if I were advising Barack Obama, if I were Dick Morris, and I was called in, hushed in to a private meeting to advise Barack Obama on what to do, that would be one of the things I would tell him politically to do.
Well, the one thing they are doing politically, which I think liberal bloggers have been excited about, is the hitting Wall Street harder. I think they've definitely taken Slinda Lake's advice. They always knew that the bank bailout was politically dicey, but they've always argued it was necessary policy-wise, whether you believe that or not. That was the White House's take. And now it's even more pronounced how serious the political cost of that is. And so now they think they have, and so I don't know if they were never against some of these tougher measures. They just thought they'd be hard to accomplish. Now they feel like they got a political argument. Hey, not only do we think these things are right, but we really need to do them. So they bring in Paul Volcker today and offer up what they're calling, a Glass-Steagall 2, not a literal bringing back of Glass-Steagall, but some firewalls being put back in place to separate out traditional, low-risk banking with the more high-risk, proprietary trading and other stuff. Baseline scenario was very encouraged by that. Simon Johnson, this is an important change of course that, while still far from complete, represents a major victory for Volcker. Push every Republican to take a public stand on this question. You'll be amazed what you hear if they stick to what they've been saying behind closed doors on Capitol Hill. And I'm actually not sure what he means by that. And then the major question is, will the White House have the courage of its convictions to really fight the big banks on this issue?
Doesn't this seem like sort of a trumped up political move? Like, okay, let's become populist. So it sounds to me like the message that was received from Massachusetts is, we need to demonize somebody. We need to find a new villain and change the tune. That's sort of how it struck me.
It's not like they ever had they've had populist rhetoric before. They proposed financial reform before. But they've been more inclined to compromise on various elements. The bill coming out of the House, liberals have been sort of ambivalent about. There's some things that are tough on Wall Street and some things that people consider to be loopholes. You had in the Senate a noise that Dodd was going to drop the thing liberals are most interested in, a Consumer Financial Protection Agency, like the Consumer Product Safety Commission, that keeps lead paint out of toys, something that would say, hey, this financial product you're trying to sell to people is shady and dangerous. The bank lobby is vehemently against it. Reports are that Obama is leaning on Dodd to keep it in, and that is arguably a result of them recognizing this is something that we always wanted, but now we have an extra pressure to fight for it because we see what the political damage is. So, I think you're right that the politics are changing the prioritization, but I don't think it's 180 degrees either. It's not like they never wanted these things or ever tried or ever proposed them.
All right, so all I want to know is, where are you going to take Con Carroll to dinner to make up for
We took
that?
me out to McCormick and Schmick's for some seafood after I won the last bet about Senate passing health care after a CBO score. That was not a cheap meal, so I can't take him to Taco Bell. I don't think he's gonna have to make the call.
I think the McCormick and Schmick's people are Republican donors, so at least the money stayed in.
Maybe I can at least find an expensive place that's run by liberals.
Yeah, well, you just Ben and Jerry's or something. Never mind the dinner, straight to dessert. So that was the big thing.
The other big news today is the Supreme Court ruling,
right?
Saying that corporate campaign donations is free speech, striking down the heart of the McCain-Feingold Campaign Finance Act, and opening up the doors to corporations still can't donate to politicians directly,
right?
But the door is wide open for independent expenditures throughout the campaign. No more ban on ads close to Election Day or any sort of independent expenditures they want to do. Conservatives have always said this is a free speech issue. Are they dancing in the streets that the Roberts Alito court has come through for them?
And Kennedy.
But shouldn't Kennedy have been impeached? I thought he had sold America out to international law.
When was something Michelle Malkin came up with? No, here's the thing that I like about this. Conservatives are very happy about this, and for the right reasons. There's nobody saying this is great for us because it means we're going to win elections. In fact, you could argue that corporations and certainly labor unions who stand to benefit from this are just as likely, if not more likely, to help Democrats. But conservatives are very happy about this for the right reasons because of all the speech that ought to be protected. Political speech should be the most protected of any speech. And so I think it's a very good decision. I think it's a very good day. And I think, it's important for people to realize that the Supreme Court justices weren't deciding is this good or bad, or is this, it's not a moral judgment. The judgment is it constitutional? And clearly,
the thing that liberals are mad about is they're saying that corporations essentially have the equivalency of personhood when it comes to free speech, something, as a conservative might say, is not in the Constitution. The word corporation is not there in the First Amendment. So there's a sense that on constitutional grounds that the Supreme Court's overstepped its bounds.
I mean, that's an interesting argument to have, I guess. I mean, that would be sort of where the disagreement among people who really pay close attention. That would probably be where there is a bone of contention. But I mean, my take would be, let's take the example of Citizens United. I mean, they're the people who brought this up. Essentially, they had made a documentary about Hillary Clinton, and they wanted to air it within 30 days of the election. And had they done that, that would have been a violation of campaign finance laws. It would have been construed as a corporation spending money to defeat or elect a candidate. In this case, it would have been to defeat Hillary Clinton. In my estimation, their free speech rights were violated.
And there was an argument on some of the folks on the left that were more deeply into this to say you could have ruled that Citizens United had their rights violated on narrower constitutional grounds than what the court ended up doing. You didn't have to make the broader judgment that corporate money is equivalent to free speech, period. But that's what they did.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It could have been in there. I'm actually happy that it was broader. And basically, the decision comes down to, do you believe that free speech is so important that it trumps the potential corrupting influence of corporate money? And I think that of all the things that we ought to hold dear, political speech is the most important among them. So,
now, conservatives for the year, I'd say, going back to some of the populist argument, I think conservatives have done a good job at casting themselves as populist, opposing the bank bailout, whether some of them voted for it last year or not. I think the general theme of conservatism this year has been, this is an example of government run amok in favor of Wall Street. Is there a risk for conservatives to essentially lose that narrative and seem like when people are now are most upset with corporations and their influence in the process to now be embracing, regardless of the constitutional argument, just talking about the politics,
right,
embracing an even increased influence of corporations in the political system?
Yeah, well, and again, I mean, I would point out that labor unions are also stand to benefit. I would point out that corporations have always been able to start, political action committees, and I would also point out that corporations still can't donate to individuals, but they can run independent expenditure ads. Having said all of that, I think, yeah, you're right, there is a political danger. I mean, it's part of a coherent conservative philosophy. I mean, my reason for opposing the bailouts was not a populist reason. It was based on a philosophy that government shouldn't be involved in the private sector, shouldn't be picking winners and losers, and creating an artificial environment by propping up businesses that, frankly, ought to fail because they failed in the free market. And so there really is a coherent conservative philosophy, and conservatives, again, are not happy about this Supreme Court decision because it's going to get more Republicans elected. Conservatives are happy because deep down we believe in free speech and protecting free speech. But having said all that, yes, I think you're right. There is a danger that this could politically play into the negative narrative, the negative stereotype that conservatives are nothing more than in bed with, big, money and corporations and all that. Yeah, there is a risk of that.
And I wonder now, I did see on the floor of the Senate today, John Thune was reintroducing an amendment of his to end TARP altogether. Forgive me for getting off of the Supreme Court ruling for a second. But now Obama's...
And I think he's running for president, by the way.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think he's going to run for president.
He's Scott Brownish, in my opinion.
Yeah, he is among the attractive... from what I hear from women, I wrote about this at Politics Daily. There's a big movement of women who love John Thune, and
there are no semi-naked pictures of John Thune on the internet, as far as I know.
No, but get this: I found out today that Bob McDonnell, the new governor of Virginia, was a model. I don't think there are any semi-nude. Right? I don't think there are any
like a hand model, Sears catalog model.
I don't know. George Costanza was a hand model, but there is this movement of young Republicans who are sort of ruggedly handsome. So, and Thune's among them.
Not Matt Lewis, though.
No, I try not to be thought of as a Republican as much as a conservative pain in the ass. So,
I know Thune is still trying to position himself, opposed to the bailout. But what's going to happen when Obama puts the financial crisis responsibility fee on the floor? If there's a Consumer Financial Protection Agency on the floor? If there's this Glass-Steagall 2 on the floor, I don't. When Simon Johnson at Baseline Scenario said, "What are Republicans saying privately?" I don't know if they are saying privately, "Yeah, I'm going to have to get on that train because people are so mad," or "I got to stick to my conservative principles and not want to interfere with Wall Street anymore."
No, conservatives are going to.
Do you have a sense of where the
they're going to stick to their guns?
Go on that?
They're going to stick to their guns philosophically, and they'd rather lose elections at this point than do something.
Getting a taste of Scott Brown doesn't make you want to win elections again?
Yeah, but I want to win them standing on principle, because it does you no good to win elections if you're not standing on principle. I mean, this is something
that on less so on blogs, but on Twitter, there is a little bit of conservative teeth gnashing that, wait a second, Scott Brown might not be as conservative as I would like my Republicans to be.
Well, right. Well, what happened is yesterday there was a big Scott Brown for president buzz, which I contributed to. Not that I was pushing him, but I was floating this idea because I like to do that because I'm a provocateur, I suppose. And I had done a radio interview with somebody who said he wanted Scott Brown to be president. And so I tweeted that out, and there was a lot of pushback. There were a lot of conservatives who were like, now just hold on, just wait just a minute. I was on the bandwagon because he's good for Massachusetts, but he's not pro-life. He was for Romney Care, which he was, as we mentioned, essentially what the Senate bill is right now. So there was pushback like, yeah, we all got behind Scott Brown, but now just hold your horses. Obviously, he was a big supporter of John McCain. Obviously, he met with John McCain today.
John McCain was a big supporter of him.
John McCain was a big supporter of him. He's, Mitt Romney's guy, Eric Fernstrom, basically ran his campaign, and a lot of conservatives are skeptical of Romney's conservative bona fides. So, I mean, there's a lot to like about him. He's charismatic. I mean, he gives a great press conference, a great interview, and he seems to be unflappable. And you know how conservatives like Sarah Palin, they like her looks, they like her charisma. She could give a good speech, but when people ask her tough questions, it's sort of the wheels come off. Well, Scott Brown is all that stuff, except when you ask him tough questions, he actually hits them out of the ballpark. So there is a lot of reasons.
I'm curious how Scott Brown does when things get a little bit more intense. I don't know if he really got fully tested in this very brief campaign. So I'm curious to see if he holds up over time.
Well, and it's the same thing we wondered about Barack Obama. And I'm not saying it's going to end up the same way. Who knows? But there are similarities. State senators. If Brown did run for president, pure speculation, he would have been in there about the same amount of time as Obama. So
and all those conservative arguments about it being inexperienced would disappear.
Right. Or find ways to spin out of him or something.
I'll tell you one anecdote, though. I do have a family member who is a Glenn Beck fan who was very angry with Glenn Beck.
Yes.
For breaking with Scott Brown.
Well, yeah, because Glenn Beck on his radio
not
show...
to listen to him anymore.
Wow. That's big. Yeah, because on Glenn Beck's radio show, he was... said some outrageous... it seems like he was joking. He jokes a lot on his radio show. It's different than his TV show.
Well, his radio show... I didn't know this. He went after Brown the day before the election.
Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that.
And showed a picture of the Cosmo semi-nude Brown and was mocking that.
Huh.
And what got my family member most upset is they put the black bar over his genitalia, which made it seem like it was an actual nude picture.
Right.
When it wasn't.
No.
It was a semi-nude
conveniently
picture.
Located hands or whatever. Right.
And so she thought that Glenn Beck was being, disingenuous in presenting it that way, and that really stuck in her craw.
Interesting.
So I don't think it was a one-off for Glenn Beck. I think it sounds like he's positioning himself against him, perhaps for the reason some of these other conservatives are saying that don't make this guy your hero.
Well, I mean, it's predictable that he's not going to be Jim DeMint. I mean, there will be times when he votes in ways that will anger conservatives.
Well, I wonder that. I wonder if you want to sustain a political career in Massachusetts. I mean, people might realize Massachusetts is not as liberal as they think, but it's still not a right-wing state. Sure, he's going to have to mix it up. If he doesn't care, if he wants to go 3 years and out, and pull a Sarah Palin and hit the talk show circuit, the speaker circuit, he could vote very consistently conservative and not worry about it. I don't know what his game plan is.
But I think fundamentally he's not a sort of, at least not dogmatically conservative. I mean, he was for Romney care.
I think he hadn't been as a Massachusetts state senator.
Right.
We'll see. If he is principled in that respect, whatever center-right record principles that he has, he will do center-right things. If he
That's
wants
what I would
to
expect.
Be a conservative superstar, he'll drop all that and just do the party line.
I expect him to be a center-right Massachusetts conservative. By the way, I did break a story today on Twitter, sort of, which is that CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, had invited him to speak. This is important because he's very popular now, and it would be a great draw, and also because, depending on how his votes go, this may be the only time that he would be appropriate to speak at CPAC.
Now, Glenn Beck is now the headliner at CPAC, right?
Right. Yes.
So I don't know if that's gonna. I'm curious if my anecdotal tidbit will make the CPAC Legion do the CPAC more into Scott Brown now than Glenn Beck.
It'll be interesting. I couldn't tell you how. I think my experience would be the audience would love both of them and give them both standing ovations. So
when is CPAC this year?
I'd have to look, but it's in February.
February.
Yeah, it's in February. I'll be there.
Maybe we should make a special trip.
You should come down, man. I'll be there. I'm covered.
I was there 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's a delightful event.
There's like 5,000 people there. A lot of young people, a lot of college students.
They bust them in.
They do, and they get
they pay their way and recruit the hell out of them.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. Actually,
it's a great idea.
A guy named
the money.
And a lot of people don't know this, but CPAC was almost dead about 12, 13 years ago. They were becoming this old person's thing, and it was not a cool event. And a guy named Christian Josie, who at the time was the executive director of the ACU, which runs CPAC, American Conservative Union, which runs CPAC, he's the guy who reinvigorated it, who got CPAC to bring in young people and to make it a cool, hip place to be. Obviously, it was part of the Stephen Glass saga. One of his made-up stories for the New Republic was about something that didn't happen at CPAC. If you've seen the movie Broken Glass, you know what I'm talking about. And now there's a young lady named Lisa DePasquale who's doing a very good job of running it. And last year, obviously, Rush Limbaugh was the big headliner. So it always makes news. 2 years ago, Mitt Romney withdrew from the presidential race at CPAC.
Right.
So it always makes news, and it's the place to be. And of course, Sarah Palin won't be there again. Ronald Reagan spoke at 12 CPACs.
And everyone there quotes him.
Oh, yeah, and
I've never heard bold colors versus pale pastel so many times.
My rule, too, that I learned from a friend is if you see anybody who has a patriotic necktie, run the other way. If you see someone who's got, I love America, and I will wear your lapel pin. I don't have a problem with that, but I'm not going to wear the necktie. I'm not even sure that may be anti-patriotic. There are people who
It is desecration of the flag.
Right. And, by the way, I'm heading down to Texas tomorrow. I'm going to Austin. It's Governor Rick Perry's doing this blogger summit, and I'm on a panel there with a bunch of other people. Andrew Breitbart's going to be there. Ben Dominic from the New Ledger, one of the co-founders of Red State. Melissa Clouthier, who's prolific on Twitter. She'll be there.
Get some chicken fried steak at Threadgill's for me.
I will do that, but I'm confident there will be people in the audience with the Texas flag necktie or shirt. So,
well, one last thing we want to talk about, the other thing in the conservative world outside of Scott Brown is the launch of the Daily Caller.
Yes. I went to the Daily Caller launch party.
Now, what is the Daily Caller?
The Daily Caller is it's Tucker Carlson's group. Tucker Carlson runs it. He is, I guess, the president editor. Apparently, trying to think of the guy's name. I had dinner with it was a big conservative donor who fronted, I think, around $3 million. I actually had dinner with him this summer. His name escapes me right now. But in any event, apparently, it looks like the model is sort of Huffington Post-esque. It looks good. And I was at the party, and I was having a nice conversation with Paul Begala, telling him how much I enjoyed his book, Buck Up, Suck Up, and Come Back When You Foul Up. And I was interrupted by David Frum, seriously, who cut me off mid-sentence to introduce Begala to somebody else. So David Frum continues to haunt me. But back to the Daily Caller. You've had a chance to look at it. It's gotten a pretty good buzz. I think it's a good site. What is your take on it?
Well, I just don't know if he is. I mean, my understanding was his original idea was there needs to be a conservative site that is factually reliable.
Right. Well, and he actually got booed at CPAC a couple years ago for saying that he was sorry to see the New York Times going through hard times because they get stories right. So that's been his MO.
Right. And I don't feel like he launched with... I mean, you tend to launch these things with some kind of hot story to catch people's attention, and there is no Daily Caller scoop to really kick things off with. So I don't know if he's. I mean, maybe does that say there are plenty of TV shows of a bad pilot and and get their sea legs. I just don't know if he has figured out yet how you do a conservative site that is breaking some news reliably that you're not getting somewhere else.
Yeah, and a lot of it so far has been commentary or sort of like opinion stuff. There's a guy named Jim Treacher. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Treacher. And apparently this guy was a popular blogger, but not like nationally known. And he didn't live in D.C. Not that that's a bad thing. But Tucker Carlson, he's funny, and Tucker Carlson sort of found him and liked him and hired him, brought him to D.C. So that's interesting. I'll give you my two. Generally, I think the site's very good, and I think it'll do well. My two sort of mild criticisms of it would be, one, I love the name Daily Caller. I think that's a really cool name, but the abbreviation DC, I wonder about. Just DC reminds me of the Washington, D.C. government, which isn't that great. And it's just DC is obviously an inside the Beltway sort of thing, even though it's the abbreviation for their name. But on a larger point, they have brought in, because I think Tucker has a really cool kind of youngish libertarian persona that I like. And he's got some young people like this blogger, Jim, and SC Cup, and a lot of young people working for him and writing for him. But then he went out, and they've got a lot of content, just like townhall.com where I used to write, a ton of content. But they've got some of these writers who are just sort of like conservative people who've been around for 30 years. And I don't want to call anybody out on my side of the aisle. So let me give you an example, Bill. It would be like if you launched a new site and you wanted it to be really cool, and you got you got Rachel Maddow and Rachel Sklar and Bill Scher and kind of young writing, but then you had the true greats. But then you go out and you get Bob Beckel, and you get who's been around a while. You get sort of the Bob Beckles of the world. You get Bill Press, fine guys. I like them, but they sort of because you got to have them because they've. But I feel like sometimes the inclusion of some of these people who've been around a long time, who seem to be ubiquitous as well. They're not really branded with one site necessarily. That might detract from the hipper, younger image. Thoughts on that?
Now, this is breaking news. I don't even know if you know this, Matt. But Air America has filed for real bankruptcy and is ending operations altogether.
I saw that.
I haven't seen any blogging about this yet. I would imagine there will be conservative blogging saying, "Ha ha ha."
Well, and by the way,
can't work.
Anna Marie Cox wasn't she there? I mean, isn't that her main thing now too?
She had a weekend show there. I'm not sure that's her only paycheck. But the thing that I think most folks don't fully grasp about what happened with liberal talk radio is that Air America was the game changer, but it wasn't a success story. Al Franken was a success in that he turned his show into a platform for running for Senate, and Rachel Maddow gravitated to MSNBC.
Ed Schultz was a talk radio. Actually, Ed Schultz used to be a conservative talk radio show host.
Well, my point is that the leading lights of liberal talk radio now, Ed Schultz, Tom Hartman, and Stephanie Miller, are not Air America anymore. Well, actually, only Tar Hartman was. Schultz and Miller never were. So, those shows, which are and Randy Rhodes is not Air America anymore either, and she's back on the air. So the leading lights, this doesn't affect them at all. What Air America did was establish that you could have a liberal talk radio format that could be sustainable. But they had, for a whole host of, bad business reasons, not so necessarily the product, or the basic idea of the product. Air America has always been a financial, cluster F.
Well, by the way, it's not just Air America. Townhall.com, where I used to work, parent company is a radio station company called Salem Radio. Apparently, they have let go Janet Parshall's America, which is one of their sort of a Christian radio show. But I'm hearing rumors that there are other shoes to drop. It's a tough time.
Is taking a hit in the recession.
Yes, it's a tough time to be in that business.
Talk radio always has dips on off election years, and if you're a weak business, you're going to fall off the cliff.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, Ed Schultz, Stephanie Miller, Tom Hartman, Randy Rhoads, those are all solid shows. That their audiences are not as big as Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, but they're as big as some other mid-range conservative hosts. You're getting 1 to 3 million folks a week, which is all right. So the Air America failing is not evidence that liberal talk radio is inherently flawed as a concept.
That's a whole other debate, but I hear your point that you can't say that because this happened that it hasn't been successful to some degree, because obviously it has spawned people, say like Al Franken. That was the bridge for him to go from being a comedian to being a politician.
Absolutely.
Right?
If you listen to that show, you find often he wasn't trying to be funny. He was often trying to be serious and trying to show that he had policy chops. And that transition worked.
So I would encourage our listeners, by the way, listen to us on iTunes. A lot of people don't know that. This is podcast. You can go to iTunes and listen to it weekly. Or our viewers. I'd love to know what do you think of the Daily Caller? It was a big story. It launched. It could, I think the vision is for it to be very influential among opinion leaders inside the Beltway, ultimately. Red State, for example, reaches a lot of people on Capitol Hill. I think townhall.com probably reaches a lot of people in Middle America, but all over. But I think that Tucker, I'm guessing, and I don't know this for a fact, but his vision would be for TV producers and radio producers to go to the Daily Caller every day, just like people at MSNBC go to Talking Points Memo before signing up guests and coming up with topics. And even if you have a small audience, if the sort of elites in newspapers and TV producers are going to you to find out what the conservatives think on this, then you can really influence the debate. So it's something to keep an eye on.
If those who have thoughts about the Daily Caller, I imagine they could respond to us on Twitter.
The
Weekend
Bill, it's
Blog.
funny. It is funny you mentioned that, because we are on Twitter. We're at the Weekend Blog, yes.
Well, I think that does it for this week in the blog.
You've wasted another perfectly good 47 minutes.
But I guess we'll talk next week.
We will talk next week. I'm heading to Texas. I hear it's about 70 degrees down there, so I'm excited.
Do you need to take
that.
a week off? You're a hard-working man. I think you're owed one.
The thing is, if you've got a gig, you just keep doing it, man. There's some 27-year-old looking over my shoulder right now, angling for this spot.
Well, then we'll talk next week, sir.
All right, have a good one, man.
Take care.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Bye.